We'll try to make it interactive if we can. And we will try to make it interesting. Hopefully it'll be worth it for you. In the meantime, I am going to put my office phone on Do Not Disturb. And I'm going to silence my cell phone because that will bleep. Because the minute people try to call my office phone and it doesn't answer, guess what they do? They call this one. All right. So, let's start. We're going to come back to the training guidelines in a minute. We're going to talk about learning objectives and an agenda, and then we'll do some introductions because I don't think I know any of you. I may have run into some of you somewhere. So in this presentation, at the end of this presentation, you should all be able to define trauma. I apologize, I'm looking away, but I'm using 2 monitors. And if I move things too much, it gets all weird. So I apologize for that, but the presentation is up off to my right. So you should be able to define trauma. You should be able to understand trauma's effect on thinking and behavior. We'll spend some time on that. We will spend a lot of time talking about trauma-informed care, and we'll do some breakout groups to give you a chance to apply the work that we talk about and to see how it would apply to your work with clients. Does that fit what everyone is expecting from today?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Already, okay. So the agenda, we'll talk about trauma. We're going to talk about what it is, how prevalent it is, and what are the consequences of it. We'll talk about trauma-informed care. We're going to talk about principles. We're going to talk about how we have to change the way we think about this kind of work. If we want to be trauma-informed, we need to be the ones that change. And we will then spend some time practicing in groups. My goal is to take breaks every hour. Normally in a class like this, a training like this, I would take 1 break. But if somebody could be a timekeeper and tell me when it's about like 5 of 10, I'm thinking if we take 5-minute breaks every hour, get people a chance to get up, move, stop looking at the computer, look at something else, move around, it makes the day go by a little bit less difficultly. Okay? So how comfortable are all of you with Zoom?
Comfortable.
So we don't need to sit here and talk about what the chat box is and how to mute and all of that stuff. So so you're all comfortable with Zoom, show me how you actually raise your hand. I'm trying to find it.
I don't see that. I don't see that option, Don.
You may not. Okay, so if you have a button on the bottom, you have a taskbar at the bottom. Way to the right, it might say more. And in there, it might say reactions, or it might have a thing that says reactions at the bottom.
We just have reactions. And
check on reactions and see what pops up.
Yeah, there's a hand there.
Yep, you can
clapping, thumbs up, heart.
You can clap, you can congratulate, you can do all that fun sort of stuff, right? So that, feel free. Oh, someone else just gave a thumbs up. Brenda did.
I have thumbs up and clapping. That's all I have.
A lot of it depends on the version of Zoom. There are a lot of different versions running out there. So my suggestion is we all just sort of, what I said to Pete is, in this time, we don't know how to do this stuff sometimes. Even when we do, every time I log into Zoom, something looks different. I have an actual button on the bottom here that says remote control. I don't know, maybe it gives me the option to click from across the room. I don't know why we would do that. So it changes all the time. I just say, let's just all be nice to each other about it. If you feel like, I will try to pay attention to you all and if you raise your hands in the screen, I'll try to notice that, but I won't guarantee I'm good at that. One of the other things that, so if you need me and I don't pay attention, unmute yourself, get my attention, post a chat, do something, whatever you need to do to be heard, okay? One other thing that people have found, and you may or may not have this option, if you go on your own picture on Zoom, if you hover over it, you'll see a thing that says mute, and then you'll see 3 dots. If you click the three dots, if a menu will pop up, you can mute, you can do that. At the bottom is one that says hide self view. Some people don't like looking at themselves at Zoom. So if you do that, you won't see yourself. You'll see everybody else, but you won't see yourself. Some of us think we're really handsome and attractive and love to look at ourselves. And some of us, like me, get kind of like, oh, I hate it. It makes me feel really weird because I'm always looking to see where I'm looking and how I look. And so if that makes you feel more comfortable, do that. Do what makes you feel comfortable in these very odd times that we're living in. And now my presentation is not advancing.
Just to share, I found the raise hand option in the participants option.
Oh, okay. Yep. Is it in there for you? Yep. Sometimes it is in there. Oh yeah, look at that. It is in there. So play with it. You know, the worst that'll happen is you get kicked out by Zoom. Zoom gets upset sometimes. It kicks people out, and we'll always let you back in. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay. So we did all of this. I should move these slides into a better order. I apologize. Let's talk about some group guide. Well, before we talk about group guidelines, let's get some introductions. The only person that I really am familiar with here is Pete. And so what I'm thinking we can do is do a quick introduction. There's a total of 11 of us in this room. And just tell me who you are. I assume you're all working for the Coalition for the Homeless in the new call center. So tell us one reason that you decided to take a position like this. So I'll tell you, my name's Don. I work at CrossFit. I've been here for like 11 years now. And my current title is Director of Training and Clinical Partnerships. So a lot of what I spend about half of my time, it used to be in person doing training. Now it's doing it on Zoom. And I spend about half of my time.
Please leave your message for.
Doing training, and the other half I oversee.
Please leave your message for.
Is that isn't me, is it? Whoever it is may want to check that. Please tell me it's not me. I don't think it is. I blame Pete for everything that goes wrong. I blame Pete. Fair enough. You can tell Pete and I know each other for going back.
Yeah,
So
that's right, Donald Mark.
yes, Peter, whatever your middle name happens to be. So Pete, do you need to introduce yourself, or does everybody know you?
They all know me.
Okay, so I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves. What I'll do, because we all show up in different spaces on the screen, I'll just pick people going around clockwise on my screen. And just let me know what made you want to do this. And one thing you'd like to walk out of this training knowing that you don't know today. One of the other options on Zoom, if you're logged in on a computer, and you might, depending on your version of Zoom, you may be able to unmute yourself just by pressing on the space bar and holding it. That works sometimes, doesn't work other times. So that makes things a little bit easier. If you want to talk, just hit the space bar and hold it and then let it go. So we're going to start with Meg. Meg, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Meg Alex. I'm from Smithfield, Rhode Island. And I've always had a connection to the homeless. I've always felt a calling to work with them, and I'm excited to be able to finally make a difference. And what was the other question you asked?
What's something you'd like to learn today?
From the trauma. I would like to learn that I just like to learn how to approach people. Maybe when they're currently in a crisis situation, like just had trauma occur to them.
So how to approach someone in a way that doesn't make things worse.
Correct.
It can actually be helpful. Great, thank you. Lorena?
Hi, I'm Lorena, and I have had tastes of homelessness in my past, and I've had a long, winding road of healing and stability from a lot of beautiful people that have helped me along my way. And I'm at a place now where I saw this option of this work, and I was like, oh my God, I would so love to be in a place where I can pay forward, help that I received. And so it's very meaningful for me to be a part of something like this. And I would like to learn, if it's possible, how to, when I'm in communication with a person, if I can read um, cues of what kind of trauma they're coming from, and then just kind of help that while I'm communicating, so I know better how to modify myself
Oh,
to get what information I need so I can assist them best in the short amount of time I probably will have with them.
oh, great. That actually is really a cool thing you brought up, because a big thing about trauma-informed care, I think you've got a good start just by talking that way, is that we have to change and adapt our response to the individual's particular circumstances. And so a big part of learning to be trauma-informed is learning and thinking about, okay, what is in front of me and what is the response that I can give that is going to be the most helpful, instead of just reacting from my own personal emotions. So thank you, I appreciate that. You're Myri.
Hi, my name is Yamairi, and I just want to learn like better techniques to help clients address their trauma in therapy.
Okay, thank you. I will say that we probably won't meet that objective for you. So I'm going to most of what we're sorry, but
That's okay.
we can talk a bit. What I will say is trauma-informed care is more about how do we behave in a way that actually engages people who have experienced trauma. We won't be getting into a lot of how do people heal from trauma today, for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it's probably not, as a call center employee, that's probably not your job. And I don't know how many of you are actually clinicians, but usually trauma-specific treatment should be done by a clinician, a licensed clinician. We'll talk about some of that, but I will say, not to be, so that it's not a total disappointment for you, Myri. Trauma-informed care, I think, is really important in helping people to heal, but not specifically for the trauma. I think what trauma-informed care does is it creates a sense of safety. It creates a sense where people feel they have some kind of control. And with those things, then they may be able to develop the strength and the resources and the willingness to go ahead and look for some kind of trauma treatment. And we'll talk about what some types of trauma treatment are, but that's a different training, okay? Amy.
Good morning, Don. My name's Amy. I'm from Providence, Rhode Island. I've actually been for several years very active in our community, volunteering at HMIS House. I've actually participated with folks from my church, running a couple of during towards the holidays, we did do in the community room some food at Crossroads in the last couple of years.
Sadly not able to do that as much now, huh?
I know, and also even just I live in the area. I own property in the area. My family, we have a lot of tenancies. We own a lot of property, and seeing how the homelessness issue has grown, and a lot of times folks would be like, hide it, set it aside. Thinking Paolino here, and I'm like, you can't.
I'll keep my opinions to myself.
But and so, it's something we have to face head on. And I come from a financial background, and so I was like, I want to do something that will help people directly. So And the fact that we have this, the CES call center being created, and we're really going to be the first kind of like line of defense kind of to kind of help people get into, housing, to get into at least shelter, especially with the winter coming. I honestly jumped to the opportunity to leave, corporate finance to, a nonprofit. And what I'm looking forward to in this training today, like Lorena said, is that how to, be cognizant and tailor myself and meet my client where they're coming from, so that we can be, get the most out of the, 5 to 20 minutes, however long, I may end up speaking with the person, and really, really help them, and in no way, make them feel in any way uncomfortable, or, get them, thrown off from contacting CES for assistance, and to get, put into the system. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I love the way you put it, that 5 to 20 minutes that you have. We sometimes don't realize that 5 to 20 minutes can make or break a situation. And that as the first contact, one of the things I try to stress when I talk to people in-house even is the first impression we make tends to linger. So if you're having a bad day and you're on the phone and you get a little short with somebody, then that is how the organization, from their perspective, that is what CES call center is. It doesn't, so one of the slogans that I've heard over the years is, our clients don't deserve our bad day. So I think you bring that up, and that's really important. Thank you. Latoya.
Hi, I'm Latoya. I live in Cranston. I'm looking forward to this because this helps with my full-time job. I'm a case manager, and I also do protective services. So
Oh,
we
wow.
often get those protectives who have a lot of trauma through their report, and they're not open to services. So maybe this will help me kind of engage them more into offering them. And then also with the call center.
Oh, wow. No pressure there or anything for me, but okay. Thank you. Wow, great. So you do a lot of challenging stuff. Wow, thanks. Jeanette?
Hi, Don. Nice to meet you. So I've basically worked with the same population for close to 14 years. So I'm very looking forward to starting kind of a new chapter, and just working with a new group, a new population. Excited to serve this one. But I think you kind of answered a lot of my questions that I've had during these past days quickly right now, just to what extent, I guess, how we'll apply it to this situation, to the calls. And I still kind of don't really, I guess I need to get to it, but just picturing it, like how a call will be, how long it will be, to what extent we'll use everything that we've learned, what we're going to learn today, that we learned yesterday during the call, and how to better help us, I best to better serve the caller, right?
Great.
And serve the mission.
Wow. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm
The
going to say,
pressure's on, Don.
I'm sorry?
The pressure is on, Don.
The pressure is on. I mean,
No
knowing
worries.
Pete, if things don't go well for the next few weeks, it's because Don did a rotten training.
Wait, I thought we were blaming Pete.
That's right. That's right. Wait a minute. How did that happen? He turns it around. Yeah, Pete used to work at Crossroads, and at one time actually worked for me. So we have a way of interacting that. Just bear with it. It is. Shermine?
Yes, hi, Don.
Hi. Which pronunciation?
Shermine.
Shermine. Okay, great.
I worked in the emergency room, and I kind of had a introduction to homelessness, and I guess in passing, I really didn't have to know too much about their life, but it kind of opened my eyes to what's really going on. Because some people, we're parents made the choices to make sure we didn't see certain things. And when I saw that, I realized how sad I was that I was so fortunate, and then there are others that are not. And it kind of like made me feel like, I forgot who said that we were born, but we won't, the two important days of our life is when we're born, and then the next day is when we realize what we are here for. And I said, you know what, I need to know what I'm here for. And this opportunity came, and I said, maybe this is my calling to somehow figure it out. And I've always been an advocate to helping people and children, and this kind of like fell in my lap away in a way.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brenda.
Hi, good morning. My name's Brenda. My pronouns are she and her. I was really drawn to this job for a few reasons. I left a position at a family resource center and outpatient mental health clinic where we served the community, and there were several homeless folks who came in to access our services. One thing that really drew me to this job was that when I was young, I was not homeless, but I did experience insecurity with our housing. So it's been an issue that, touched me personally. So when COVID came and I lost my last job and I saw this one, there were a lot of dots that were connected for me. And our last agency was a trauma-informed agency. So I was really excited to see this training today because trauma-informed care is a really an area of big interest of mine. So I think it's like whenever you're really interested in something, you like really can't get enough of it. So I'm happy to be here today and to, just hear, more and again about trauma-informed care. I also have noticed that with some of my past training in trauma-informed care, it really helped me in my personal life and also in the work that I do for PFLAG. I work with the queer and trans community here in Western Mass extensively. So it's been, a really wonderful tool for me. So thanks for.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I'd be interested to hear as we go through how, if there's information you've heard in other trainings that we can incorporate later. So
sure.
Great. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm located in North Providence, Rhode Island. I'm originally from Boston, though. The homelessness has always been like something that I kind of like had like a soft spot for or passionate about. I grew up in like a small inner city outside of Boston, so it was something that I've seen frequently. And I am a behavior specialist on my like other job, so I have a lot of like training and background in like trauma and just like mental health, all that stuff. I take trainings like all the time, so like I guess from this training I'm looking forward to learning something that I don't know yet, and if I can contribute anything, I'd be happy to do that. And I guess I'm new to like the whole call center. I have more of like an experience with like nonprofits and like I guess just like behavioral health and stuff like that.
Great. So we've got a variety of experience levels here too, which is really cool. So hopefully this will be a really engaging discussion. So let's move on. We're going to talk quickly about group guidelines. We at Crossroads, our primary values are safety, respect, and effectiveness. And I have tried to go through this slide and de-crossroads it, but I forgot this one. So it's still organized by our 3 primary values. The one, we normally, if we had a whole lot of time, we could break up into groups and I would ask each of you to come back and tell me one thing that's important for you to feel safe and comfortable in the group. But I thought it was more important to get introductions here. So let's look at this quickly. The 2 that I would say that I would highlight for you our confidentiality, I would encourage, in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about this. I would encourage you not to share your deepest, darkest secrets, things that are very triggering for you. Only, not because we're not interested, but only because we're not in a position to support each other through that. It's very difficult to do. So to share what feels safe. You will be seeing each other. So if you share something super personal and then you feel unsafe afterwards, that's probably not helpful to you. The other thing is I always highlight using airtime appropriately, and I can't take credit for this, but stepping up and stepping back. So if you are someone who loves to participate and you always have the answer, and you are that kid that everyone hated in school that always had your hand up and wanted to give the answer, maybe sit back and give someone else a chance. Don't not participate, but monitor how much you participate. If, on the other hand, you're one of those people who's very shy and always sits in the back of the room and doesn't want to talk and wants to be invisible, sort of like blend into the wall if you can, try speaking up. This is a good chance for us to exercise skills and step outside of our comfort zone, as long as we do it in a way that feels safe. Does all of that stuff make sense to people? Is there anything people would like to add to that? And is there anything on the slides that people feel like I need to touch on a little more that doesn't feel good? Going once, going twice. Okay, we'll move on to the next set. They're still talking about group guidelines. Really quickly, as I hinted at in our last slide, talking about trauma can be triggering for some people. So if something feels uncomfortable, feel free to pass. Feel free to shut off your video, mute yourself, take a few minutes break. The one thing I would ask is if you need to do that, you can send me a private chat just to let me know you're okay. So that if something goes, like if you disappear for a long period of time, I may send you a private chat just to say, hey, are you all right? And I may actually ask Pete to pay attention to that too. Because I'm not always really good at seeing what's happening in a group like this. I try in a real group with in-person group, it's a little easier for me, but this is a challenge. So feel free, if something makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to talk about it. You can just say, I pass. I'd rather not talk about that. And we will hopefully all be able to respect that. Okay. This would be our normal first breakout group, but we took a little longer than I thought. So we're going to skip that. Pete, you're off the hook for the first breakout group. Introductions, I think, are sometimes more interesting than. So let's talk about what is trauma. Would anyone like to give a quick definition of trauma? Anyone? You can unmute, you can type it in the chat, whatever feels comfortable. Oh, everyone got the chat. I was gonna say, we got a chat from Jeanette that she's gonna need to step away now and then, but okay, anyone? Oops, that didn't work at all.
I'd like to say something unsaid, something that was unexpected that just happened in a tragic way. Could be it's sudden, something sudden, but that traumatized the life in the individual person or their surrounding in a very impactful way.
So people have a good set of definitions. Yeah, usually this takes a lot longer to tease out. The big question is everything bad that happens a trauma? And the reason I put that up is that because a lot of times in our current society, we use mental health language in very, for lack of a better word, sloppy ways. So you'll hear people say, oh, you know, I'm so OCD about that, or I've got PTSD about that, or, you know, sort of things like that. And so we use clinical terms as if they apply. And in some ways, I get it. That makes sense. I mean, we talk about, there's a lot of time we could discuss whether that is respectful of people or not. A lot of discussion about that nowadays. But we use the word trauma. People will, I mean, I'll come into work and people will say, oh, I got stuck in traffic and I'm traumatized by it. Likely it was frustrating and annoying, but not traumatic. So I appreciate the way you brought that up, Sharmeen. The other thing that I think of is we want to think about the difference between trauma and grief. And there is some overlap in that. And the example I use is, it's 2020, how could I forget what year it is? In 2003, my mom passed away. And she passed away after being ill for a long time. She smoked cigarettes and died mostly from COPD. And we went through the last 10 years of her life watching her decline, being less able to move, less able to, I mean, towards the end, she was housebound. When she died, we fortunately, I mean, it was a really bad day when I got the phone call to say, hey, you need to come home now. And so the family got together and we we're all there with her when she died. And I often ask people, is that trauma? And it's not. It's sad and it hurt, but it's grief. And the interesting thing, and we could, again, if we were getting into a super clinical discussion, if we were doing like a graduate level class, we could spend time teasing it out. But because it hurts doesn't mean it's trauma. Trauma has a specific set of biological, physiological, and emotional responses that grief may or may not have. A death can be traumatic. If I'm a child and I witness my parent get murdered, is that trauma? Yes, that's trauma. But if it's expected and it's something that we've been prepping for, it's probably not going to cause a trauma reaction. Does that make sense to people? You can sort of just nod, or you can make funny faces, whatever feels good. All right. So here, I'm going to give you a definition of trauma. This is the official, super duper official definition from the DSM-5. So the DSM-5, for those of you who aren't clinicians, is the Diagnostical Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The 5th edition came out in like 2013, 13, yep. Gotta look at my things. And it's the official, they often call it the Bible, the psychiatric Bible, where if you're going to be a clinician and you're going to diagnose someone, it tells you what criteria to look for. According to the DSM-5, it's a pretty restricted definition. Exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one of the following ways. Either you directly experience it, you see it happen to someone else, you learn about it, that it happened to a close family member or someone that you care about, or you experience repeated or extreme exposure to aversive detail. So hearing about it all the time. We will come back to that at the end when we talk about vicarious traumatization and self-care. So that basically says trauma, for something to be considered trauma, it needs to involve a threat. But I actually found a more simpler way of looking at it. And so if you want to think about trauma, think about the 3 E's: events, experience, and effects. The event that is significantly threatening or frightening or harmful is what causes the trauma. So we want to not think of trauma as something wrong with the person. Events cause trauma. There are certain events, I mean, if you grow up in a concentration camp experience, you're likely going to have a trauma reaction. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. The event is the reason. And that often, people don't get that sometimes, and they tend to blame people for it. I'm sorry, I did a typo in here. It's the individual's subjective experience. I thought I saved that. I went and re-edited all of this last night, and so I apologize. Subjective experience of the event determines whether it's traumatic. So what's traumatic for me might not be traumatic for Brenda or Lorena or someone else. It all depends on how I experience it. And we'll talk a little bit more about other things that affect it. And it's something that affects overwhelms our ability to cope. So if something bad happens and I sort of have good coping skills for that particular thing and I know what I'm doing and I can handle it, I'm likely not going to have a trauma response to it. I might be upset and I might have a bad couple of weeks and I might be depressed for a bit or I might be frightened, but it won't have that long-lasting effect that trauma does. Make sense? I see some people nodding. So types of traumatic events. I'm not going to read them all to you, but if you think about, we can categorize, there are a lot of different ways of categorizing traumatic events. Physical, emotional, sexual abuse, institutional abuse, people that have been in prison settings, hospital settings, sometimes psych hospitals. Loss can be traumatic if it leads to a feeling of being threatened. So someone dying in a really horrific way can be traumatic. Natural disasters, accidents, terrorism, all of that stuff. And then systemic trauma. We don't talk a lot about that. I think we need to talk about it more. Harm caused by organizations and institutions. That's why we have trainings like this, because every one of us could potentially traumatize somebody. And we don't want to do that. I'm sorry, my phone is vibrating and it's making me crazy. We had a crisis at one of our programs this morning, so I apologize. I always tell people not to do this, but I'm going to take a quick look. It's not about that. All right. Not that I'd be able to do anything about it, but so we want to make sure that we behave in ways that don't cause trauma and that our institutions don't do it. Trauma might be unintentional and it might even be necessary. If I get in a car accident and end up, for whatever reason, they have to amputate my legs, that doesn't mean that the doctor, the surgeon who does it is a bad person and wanted to traumatize me. It might be the only way I survive, but it's still going to cause trauma for me because it's so subjective. And the other part is we talk about re-traumatization. Things that happen now, even if it may not rise to the level of trauma, if we have trauma from our past, it could re-trigger that. And we'll get to that when we talk about PTSD in a little bit. Doesn't have to happen to us, but it could happen to the group that we belong to. And I think, let me just make sure that's what's in the next slide. So when we talk about, let me get into this one. I want to keep it in some sort of logical order. That's, okay. Systemic traumas. So if you think about a different way of looking at trauma, you can divide it into acute trauma, complex trauma, and systemic trauma. For our purposes, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. If you know, if you get on mailing lists, you'll get a lot of workshops about what is complex trauma and how to deal with it and how the treatment for that might be somewhat different from the treatment for an acute trauma. But if you think about an acute trauma being one big devastating event and complex trauma being multiple events over a period of time, they can have different levels of response. And sometimes complex trauma, people learn coping skills that may be a little bit more challenging to get rid of. An acute trauma, if there's the right types of support in the event, the person may end up having a traumatic reaction, but they may not have long-term effects. They may not end up with like a chronic case of PTSD. Systemic trauma, also thinking about things like poverty and racism create trauma. And even if a person is a person of color, they may, if they're fortunate, may not have had really bad experiences with authorities or the police or people calling, behaving in racist ways, but they know people who have. And so that is sort of like a secondary kind of trauma. It can be traumatic. The other thing that I would highlight under here is historical trauma, and that we think about trauma, not just about what happened to the individual you're working with, but what groups do they belong to? The three big examples I can think of are African Americans in this country, Black people being brought here against their wishes and sold into slavery. there are people who think, yeah, that was eliminated in 1865, the 13th and 14th Amendments, and blah blah blah, and that doesn't affect people now, but it does. The legacy affects people. You think about the Holocaust. People who are Jewish live with the knowledge that at one point there were people that wanted to exterminate them from the face of this earth, and that sadly, in the last several years, those people have become more vocal, as have the white supremacists. And think about Native American people and the genocide that happened. Those kinds of things, growing up knowing that happened to the group you belonged to because you belonged to that group. LGBTQ people, similar sorts of things. They may not have experienced, people who are LGBTQ may not have been gay bashed, but they probably have heard about it, and they've heard about it over time, and those things affect us. So ways to look at it. Not the only ways to look at it. Things to remember, a couple other quick things to remember about trauma. Why that slide, did that slide pop up and disappear? I apologize, sir. Context matters. So how it happened, when it happened, where it happened, and how often it happened make a difference. So did the trauma happen as a child when you were really, really, really young and depended on your family for everything and they didn't protect you? That's going to have a different effect than if I were to walk out today and witness something horrific happening out in front of Crossroads. It might still cause a traumatic reaction, but it may not have the same type of complicated traumatic reactions. Where it happens, did it happen in your home? Was it, and how often did it happen? Does it become to the point where you can't get away from it and it shapes your vision of the world? So think about someone living in a domestic violence situation and the trauma that goes with that, and the fact that it's happening from someone that supposedly loves them. So where and when? It's happening in their own home where hopefully they would have some feeling of safety. And it may be happening over and over and over again. And so that person becomes stuck in trauma. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. All righty, let's see. Okay. How prevalent is trauma? We're going to do this and then we'll take a break. Okay. So I'll give you some quick statistics. Public mental health consumers. There was a study. So there are some of these studies that are cited at the bottom of the screen. 90% of people in the public mental health system have been exposed to trauma. That's people who go to community mental health centers like Providence Center or to inpatient mental health facilities. Most have multiple experiences of trauma, and 87% will report that they've experienced it as children and as adults. Does that make sense? I mean, does that surprise anybody?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. Veterans in a substance abuse inpatient treatment, one of these studies or two of these studies of that, 77% were exposed to severe childhood trauma. So among veterans, 77% reported trauma as childhood, and more than half, almost 60%, had a lifetime prevalence of PTSD. So you can say, based on these numbers, trauma is pretty prevalent, but you can also say, this is not everyone. This is a very select little group. And yes, you'd expect that veterans would have experienced trauma because they get dragged off into war. And yes, you'd expect public mental health consumers to have experienced trauma because they're dealing with serious illnesses and there's stigma that's attached to it, and we don't have systems that always meet their needs. So we'll move on to a different study. And a lot of you probably have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, known as the ACE study, was done by Kaiser Permanente a long time ago, 1995 to 1997. But it was such a pivotal study that it still gets cited today, and people are still writing papers about it, people are still going on it. More than 17,000 patients, half were male, half were female, almost 3/4 were white, and about 3/4 were college educated. And they were all employed and overall in good health. And how do we know that? Because they got their insurance through Kaiser Permanente, through their employer. So this is a big, big number of people being studied. And if you think about it, it's a relatively privileged group. They're all employed. You're not having people who are homeless. You're not having people, most of them with, you know, really serious health problems. If you think of the college educated white, 3/4 of them came from a position of privilege. If you Google this, you'll find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scholarly articles about it because they studied so many people and there's so much with it. And there's been numerous other studies that have done similar things and found similar findings. So this gives you a bit different sense of trauma, prevalence of trauma. Oops, I apologize. For some reason, when I'm hitting enter, it's jumping ahead 2 slides and I don't know why. This is what the ACE study looks like. If you're interested, if you want to take it, you can find it on the internet very easily. Just Google ACE study. We don't recommend using it with clients, especially in a call center setting. It's not, I mean, and in most homeless services settings, the ACE study would not be something you would do with a client because it may bring up triggers that, as like in most case management settings, people aren't prepared to deal with. So some clinicians do use it to help people identify the level and help them understand trauma. But it's basically you get a score of 1 to 10. You answer yes or no to each of the questions. So was a parent or other adult in your house, do they often swear at you, insult you, or put you down, or act in a way that made you feel afraid? You say yes, you get a point. The maximum number of points is 10. 10 adverse childhood experiences reported, minimum is 0. So what did they find from this study? Pretty simple questionnaire, right? The results that they found, ACEs are extremely common. About 2/3 of these 17,000 people reported at least one adverse childhood experiences. More than a quarter, almost 30%, reported physical abuse and 21% reported sexual abuse. So 1 out of 5 out of those 17,000 somewhat relatively privileged people that you would think have good lives reported sexual or physical abuse. The other thing they found is that ACEs cluster, meaning that if you have one, you're likely to have more than one. So almost 40% reported 2 or more, 1 out of 8 reported 4 or more. And I apologize again, that is not quite the right slideshow. I think I'm using the unsaved version, so bear with me. What they found is that increased ACE score leads to increased risk as an adult in physical, mental, and behavioral realms. So the more adverse childhood experiences, the more problems you're going to have as an adult. That kind of makes sense, right? So let's talk about trauma and the brain. And we'll talk about we used to use a model called the triune brain that said that the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the prefrontal cortex were evolved at different times over time. There's been arguments about that, so I've actually clipped this and we'll talk about the most important or the most relevant parts of the brain for trauma. I'm not a neurobiologist. Please don't ask me questions about parts of the brain and the pollens and the this and the that, because I won't be able to answer it. But I think it helps us to understand. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain, it's in the front here, and it's part of the neocortex, and it's the parts of the brain that let us know that it's where we think, it's where we process language. It's the part of our brain that allows us to plan, initiate, problem solve, make good judgments, and control impulses. So if you make a decision and you are using judgment, the prefrontal cortex is what lights up. Then there's the limbic system, which is a little bit deeper in. It's the little red spots you see there. The 2 parts that I'll highlight are the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that takes in sensory perceptions, things that you perceive in the environment. And if it seems dangerous, that part turns on and warns you that there's a threat. It releases stress hormones like cortisol or epinephrine. And that's where the fight, flight, or freeze response comes from. So if you perceive a threat, either you get ready, your body gets ready to fight it, to run, or if necessary, you just freeze and hope that people don't see you. It also is the part that stores memories. It's not the only part of the brain involved in memories, but it stores memories as emotions. It doesn't integrate memories. The integrating of the memories is the next part, which is the hippocampus. The hippocampus, think of it as a library. It's where you store and retrieve information. So an experience happens, the amygdala gets going, you feel a threat, you feel all of these things, that gets stored in the amygdala as a memory, but it's not assigned time, place, or context. It's just a feeling. Then when that is done, the hippocampus, when it works, it integrates those memories so that it knows that, yeah, that happened and it was bad. And when I think about it, I'm going to feel bad, but that was in the past. Okay, fair enough. That's how that all works. When the threat is detected, the danger zone goes on, the amygdala activates, gets overactive, you get your fight, flies, or freeze response. The hippocampus becomes underactive. It stops working. Doesn't stop completely, but it stops working. So it doesn't take those emotions that the amygdala is feeling and integrate them so that you can put some context and understanding. And the prefrontal cortex just sort of, if you look at PET scans of it, really stops functioning. So in the middle of a crisis, we can't problem solve and we can't make good judgments because the parts of the brain that we call executive functions, that prefrontal cortex, stops working. This response is designed to be short-term, to deal with a trauma or a defensive action, something that's threatening, and then it's supposed to get shut off. If it doesn't, if trauma happens over and over, if the threat is completely overwhelming, completely horrifying, if it's recurrent, if the person can't defend themselves, or if they don't get the proper supports afterwards, we get stuck. And then in survival mode, you have this overactivated amygdala. You always fight, flight, or freeze response. You perceive everything as threatening. The hippocampus doesn't work. You can have memories don't get integrated properly, and you have a difficulty distinguishing whether the memory is past or present. And that's kind of when you think about a flashback, that's where that fits. And the underactive prefrontal cortex, you have a difficult time problem solving, difficult time self-regulating. All of those things are challenged. And so people who have recurrent extreme trauma or who don't get the right support can get stuck in trauma mode. And that, I think, is enough for the first hour. Should we take a little break? Get people a chance to get up and move? I say, like, according to my computer, because the computers never lie, it's 10:02. Should we, I'll start up again at 10:10. Does that sound reasonable? So let's get up and move around a bit, stop staring at computers. Everyone's gonna wanna check their phones, their emails, all of that stuff. And we'll be back in a few minutes. All right, thank you. See you in a few.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So I took a quick look during the break and I found my updated slides. And this is one of the slides I added in the last couple of days to help people understand what makes something traumatic for one person or another. Again, you have the things we talked about: how, when, where, and how often it happens, but also what are the person's individual coping skills? What level of supports do they have? And what is their history? So that's why trauma is such a subjective experience, because you have a lot of different factors that roll into whether something is perceived becomes traumatic to someone or not. So I won't belabor that any, and we'll just get caught back up to where we were at. So let me pull us back to where we need to be. Did everyone get a chance to get a little bit of a break? I know, computers are so much fun to stare at all day, aren't they? Let's see if we can get to where we were. So we talked about how this is designed to be short-term, deal with a traumatic event to defend ourselves. What happens when we get stuck in survival mode? And this is the last slide I believe we were looking at, right? So when you think about this, think about the fact that studies are showing in homeless services, something like 97%. I wish I had the slide. I don't have it, the most recent, of people have experienced trauma. There is a lot of discussion if you look at different things about whether homelessness itself is traumatic, and it can be for some people. Other people, again, if you think of that slide about what are the supports, what are the coping skills a person has, and what is their history, for some people being homeless might be a horrible thing, but it may not cause a trauma response. There's a lot of discussion about that. I don't know if we have to, I mean, you can argue about things like that, but it doesn't really affect how we interact with clients. So if you think about one other way to look at this, think about typically the way we develop as adults. If we grow up and we develop, we spend most of our time in our prefrontal cortexes, cognition, thinking. We work all day, we think about things, we problem solve, we do all of this stuff. The next thing we might do is spend some time social and emotional needs, you know, interacting, dealing with our feelings, things like that. We have to self-regulate, but for most of us, if we've had typical development, that isn't something we have to pay attention to in as direct a way. So if somebody comes up to me and says something that I don't like, I don't have to tell myself, don't punch them in the face. I've hopefully learned to self-regulate that. For most things I can manage without having to, you know, like first time when you learn to ride a bike, you fall a lot and then you have to pay a whole lot of attention. And then once you get good at it, you don't pay attention, you just do it. Sort of like if you ever watch children take their first step, those of you who have kids, the first few times they fall and they're shaking and they have to pay very close attention to where they put their feet. And then most of us develop the skills and we don't pay attention to walking. And people like me who are clumsy probably should pay more attention. And most of us, if we're fortunate, don't have to spend all of our time focused on survival. That's a smaller part of our lives. If you have someone who develops with trauma, flip that whole pyramid upside down, where they have less time to spend thinking and problem solving, and they have less ability and time to spend on developing and attending to social and emotional needs. Self-regulation takes a lot of energy because they may or may not have had the chance to develop those skills. And the biggest thing someone who is experiencing chronic trauma deals with is survival. So what we may think of when we have someone that we're talking to, that they should be able to solve this, they just need to learn to calm down and realize this is not all about them. That someone disrespected someone in the front lobby at Crossroads and they're going to turn around and punch them in the face because they looked at their girlfriend. They're seeing that as a matter of survival, whereas we're seeing it as a lack of using poor judgment. Is that sensible. I mean, I'm trying to look at this from different angles. So we'll move on. We'll talk about consequences of trauma. This slide is from the ACE study, from the original. It's been adapted. The bottom 2 rows have been added. The original pyramid didn't include all of this. It included adverse child experiences up towards early death. But over time, we've started to understand more that local context and historical trauma can affect someone even before they're, before they're even born. So if somebody grows up in an environment of deprivation and poverty and doesn't have insurance, and the mom, before they were born, they weren't able to get, mom wasn't able to get appropriate prenatal care, they may be more sensitive to trauma. Historical trauma, again, is something we don't talk enough about, but if people who grow up in a traditionally oppressed group start out one leg, 1 foot, 1 foot, and a leg's length behind, sorry, 1 step behind, if not more. So if you take this thing and you go upward, adverse childhood experiences disrupts people's neurodevelopment. It affects the brain. So if you're thinking about the slides we just saw with the prefrontal cortex and all of that stuff, if your brain is being bathed in cortisol and epinephrine all the time, they're finding that it actually develops differently. The frontal cortex doesn't develop as well. The amygdala develops and becomes enlarged, I believe, and the hippocampus does not develop enough and doesn't become big enough, so the ability to process memories and discuss them and understand them doesn't work. So then, because of that, they have social, emotional, and cognitive impairments because they're not able to process things the same way, which then, because they don't have the ability to make the judgments, they can be more likely to adopt high-risk behaviors, which then leads to disability, disease, social problems like incarceration, and then people die early. So that's the consequences of trauma. If you look at, going back to the adverse childhood experiences study, if you look at the study, almost the effects of ACEs go up. Almost all of them go in a chart like this. So if you have I'm sorry, I usually speak better, but if you have no adverse child experiences, the chance of having a risk behavior or a complex problem as an adult is much less than if you have 4 or 5. And so we can give you a couple little snapshots of this. Childhood experiences versus adult, we would call it adult alcohol use disorder now, but the slide is old. If you've had no adverse childhood experiences, the percent chance that you're going to have an adult alcohol use disorder is between 2 and 4%, like just less than 3. But if you had 4 or more, the chances of having an alcohol use disorder as an adult are 16%. That's 8 times as likely. Similarly, I'll only show you 3 of these slides. There are dozens of them out there from adult injection drug use as an adult. If you have no adverse childhood experiences, you can have about a 0.5% chance of developing injection drug use problems as an adult. If you have 4 or more, you're about 3.5%, which is like, and again, like 10 times, no, 7 times, right? 7 times more likely if you have 4 or more to be an injection drug user. And the last one we'll look at is suicide attempts as an adult, and almost all of them show a very similar pattern. These charts all look the same. So what does all of this mean? It means that our clients have experienced trauma, and all systems have trauma. Everyone, no matter where you're working, you're going to be coming across people who have trauma. Some of the consequences of trauma, we're going to go through this real quick. And then, oh, look, Pete's back. Hi, Pete. You can think of the consequences of trauma: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. Physical, there's a whole lot of them. I won't sit here and go through each one of these for you, but trauma having your brain bathed in trauma hormones, stress hormones, will affect your heart, your immune functioning. They're finding that people with significant trauma, especially recurrent trauma, can have reproductive problems. They can be less likely to be able to conceive if they want to. Musculoskeletal, like aches, pains, things like that. Insomatization, having health issues, medical problems that they can't find a cause for. We used to call it psychosomatic. Mental problems, a big one, PTSD. This is a very, 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 very simplified definition of PTSD. If you look at the DSM-5, there are pages and pages and pages about it. But if you think of PTSD, think of it as people re-experiencing the events. They're always aroused. That fight, flight, or freeze response is stuck on. And they do whatever they can to avoid things that remind them of the trauma, whether they know it or not. So they can stay away from things that seem frightening, that may not seem frightening to you or me if we haven't been through that. Other mental health problems resulting from trauma, anxiety, panic attacks, things like that. Depression makes sense. Addiction issues, substance use disorders, things like that. A lot of these things are much more common among people who have experienced trauma. Emotionally, this is what you will experience a lot of, what you'll see when you talk on the phone with people. Emotional numbing, guilt, shame, difficulty understanding social cues. You may not see this as much on the phone, but when we do in-person meetings with clients, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one, reading the next slide. This is very strange, this whole multiple monitor thing. I apologize. Difficulty with motivation. We'll come to the social cues later. Lack of emotional self-awareness. People may not even know that they're yelling at you. They may be angry and they're just not aware of it. And then there's emotional dysregulation, where people can't manage their emotional responses. We call it affective regulation. So they become enraged really easily. They become sad really, really easily. They make something that seems not like a big deal, knocks them off their equilibrium. Other social impacts, social isolation, difficulty reading social cues. So that's where people see other people as abusive and may accuse you of targeting them, even if you're just applying the rules consistently. Why are you treating me like that? Why are you being, I know that you let other people do this. And then difficulty with boundaries. People who have experienced trauma, in order to meet their needs and to soothe themselves, may be overly friendly. They can be seductive. And that's where you start seeing things like staff splitting. And that, people will say, Amy, why aren't you doing this for me? Because Jeanette always lets me do this. And if you have kids, and if the mom says no, one parent says no, they go to the other parent and say, it's not an inherently disordered behavior, but it can cause a lot of problems when people continue to do that as adults, and that's how they function. Spiritual effect, consequences. Trauma can really disrupt people's sense of purpose, meaning, and their belief systems that they were brought up with. So some people who have experienced trauma will tell you that they're being punished by God, or that God has let them down. They may be angry at God. The other thing that happens is people may lose their faith community. If they lose their faith, they may stop. If they were part of a faith organization, they may just stop going. And there's a really significant social support for them that just suddenly goes away. Or may not suddenly, may gradually, they may just drift away. I would, just to not be totally negative here, some people find meaning and they go through a spiritual crisis and they find meaning from it. And if you think of books like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, where people transform the trauma they've been through into a way of helping other people, it can actually help. Finding spiritual meaning can help alleviate the symptoms of trauma. So I'm going to give you a picture and a quote. The quote is taken out of context, but I like it anyway, so bear with me. It's from Ernest Hemingway. I believe it's from Farewell to Arms. The world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are strong in the broken places. So people who do heal from trauma sometimes will say, I have very few people say, I'm really grateful for the fact that I was traumatized. I don't think I hear that, but I hear a lot of people say, I'm grateful that I learned for the things I've learned as I've healed and I've become stronger. Okay. Any questions about trauma? What it is, how it works, stuff like that? We're going to get into trauma-informed care, and we're a bit behind schedule, so I'm going to go fast if that's okay. And so let's talk about the difference between trauma-specific treatment and trauma-informed care. Basically, when you talk about trauma-specific treatment, you're talking about treating the symptoms. And there are a bunch of evidence-based practices out there. There's trauma-informed CBT, there's EMDR, which is still a little bit kind of controversial, eye movement desensitization and restructuring. Some say it's effective, some say it isn't, some say it's not been proven yet. There are a lot of interesting trauma-specific treatments. A lot of them are not even short-term. And despite, I will tell you, as a licensed clinician, if someone came to me and wanted to heal from trauma, I don't know as I would feel, I would need to do some reading and get caught up on what the most evidence-based stuff is, because our knowledge base on this is always changing. But a lot of them are not long-term. If you watch the movies, you watch things like, oh, I'm showing my age, but things like Prince of Tides and Ordinary People, and people have been through trauma. We always think of trauma, recovery from trauma, as the person has to have this big cathartic emotional event. And then, you know, they spend all this time, they show you how disturbed they are. And then they have this big event with the therapist, and there's always someone breaking down in tears. And then the screen goes black, and then they wake up in the next scene, they seem to be better. And they have coping skills and stuff. And my experience and the things I've read, doesn't always work that way for most people. A lot of people, that is sort of backwards. What people do is they develop the skills and the coping skills and the support systems, and they develop strength. And then they're able to confront the trauma. And so that's where trauma-informed care, I'm trying to think, who was it? You're all in a different order, so I don't know who said what anymore. But one of you mentioned earlier about helping people to heal. I think it might have been Jeanette. Or like, that's where trauma-informed care is part of the healing process. Because if we take into account the effect of trauma on people, and we work at not traumatizing, re-traumatizing them, we can be part of them developing the strength to then seek out whatever treatment they find helpful. Does that help put things in context a little bit? I can't remember who mentioned that at the beginning. It might have been Myri, but can't remember. So what is trauma-informed care? Is a set of underlying principles. It's not just specific procedures. It's a way of looking at things. So we had the 3 E's earlier. Now we're going to have the 4 R's. Realize, recognize, respond, and resist. If a trauma-informed organization realizes that trauma is widespread, it understands that there are paths to recovery, it recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. It responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into our policies and procedures and practices. So it's not just about you and me and how we talk to people on the phone, it's how do we set up and structure our work. And we actively try to resist re-traumatizing people. So in order to achieve that, I'm gonna go through these fast too. There are 7 principles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Safety is the first one. And what basically is talking about creating an environment where people feel safe. Can people have an idea, any thoughts about how you can create safety? I mean, in your setting, be on the phone. If anyone wants to share 1 or 2 of those.
Tone of voice.
Tone of voice, absolutely. So if you pick up the phone and you say, how can I help you? As opposed to, oh, this is Don, how can I help you? Definitely. Anything else?
I think being fully transparent and honest about what we can do for them.
Absolutely. So promising things we can't do, or letting people go on about something that we're not going to be able to do, isn't going to create an environment of safety. Absolutely. Two really good examples. Thank you. Leads to the next one, trustworthiness and transparency. Letting people, being clear. I mean, pretty much basically what Brenda just said, that we want to build and maintain trust. We won't spend a lot of time on that one. Peer support, mutual self-help. Probably not as relevant in a call center setting, but a lot of studies are showing that peers are very helpful to each other. And a lot of organizations are beginning to hire peer specialists, trained peer specialists, because they can respond to someone in a way that can build safety in a different level than dealing with someone who is a clinician. It's also very, peers empower each other. Collaboration and mutuality, as much as possible, partnering with people. So asking, what would you like to do? Instead of telling them what they need to do. How would you like to handle this? These are the options. More collaborative than saying, you know, if you want to get into shelter, you got to do this, that, and that. Fair enough? Empowerment, voice, and choice. Giving people a voice and a choice in what they do, letting them know what their options are. And believing the people, believing in resilience, believing that if you give them choices, they may not make the right choice according to our standards today, but believing that they have the ability to move forward and get better. Paying attention to gender, culture, history, being sensitive to that when we're talking to people, looking at our own stereotypes, our own biases, being gender responsive, and paying attention to things like historical trauma, knowing that if you're talking to someone from a traditionally oppressed group, they may react to you differently. Learning is continuous, learning is ongoing. None of us is perfect. None of us is going to be perfectly trauma informed. And when we're under stress, we will tend to regress, and most of us tend to have a harder time exercising those executive functions when we're under stress. So we might not always be at our best. We do the best we can. So think of the concept of universal precautions. I mean, it comes out of the HIV crisis and people started talking about universal precautions in the 80s, assuming that everyone that a medical professional treats has a bloodborne disease. So you treat everyone. I mean, when I was younger and we went for blood work, they didn't put gloves on. Now they do. Things like that. So assume when you talk to people that they have been traumatized. If they haven't, you're not going to hurt them. If they have and you pay attention to that, it's going to remind you of how to interact with them in a way that that will be less likely to re-traumatize them. So that's the whole large scale picture. Let's talk about some ways that we can actually put this in practice. What you want to do is change your mindset. We're going to do a paradigm shift here. So we're going to shift the way we assess and intervene from asking what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And you'll see if you read about trauma-informed care, this particular shift in assessment and intervention shows up almost in every article I've read about trauma-informed care. Because we tend to think that there's something wrong with our clients, and we want to shift from thinking that to something happened to them. There's a reason they're acting this way. There's a reason they're being rude to me. Okay? I promised I wouldn't talk for 3 hours, but I feel like I'm talking a lot, and so I apologize for that. Excuse me. So as we talk about this, traditionally, organizations and treatment providers have relied on displays of power. So I used to work in a mental health center, and we had emergency services, and you would hear them call a code over the PA when there was someone acting out in the emergency services department, and a bunch of people would run down, including security, and they would be ready to grab that person, put them on the floor, and give them a shot of Haldol in the butt. And I'm showing you how old I am because they're still talking about giving shots of Haldol. We used to call it a show of force. And if someone was acting out, you might just send them because they knew if security was coming, they would calm down. It was a way of getting people to do what we wanted them to do. As much as possible, we want to avoid coercive interventions. I doubt that you're going to have those kinds of circumstances on the phone. But if you think of a way it might apply is, what do you do when someone's being excessively rude to you? When you say, I'm sorry, I don't have any beds there tonight, and they start yelling at you and calling you names. One way to do it would be to get angry back. The other is to say, I'm really sorry, and to avoid trying to be coercive. Traditionally, we looked at people's illnesses. We see that they're sick, ill, or immoral, and we want to look at that they're hurt and suffering. So instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you? That one's a pretty simple one. Negative language to describe behavior. You want to focus on client-centered, person-first language whenever possible. We're going to do an exercise on that. That's our poll. No, is that our poll? No, it's not. That's our uploadable activity. Client activities are bad or possibly immoral. A lot of people still look at things that way. And you have to think about what they're doing is telling you something. What are they telling you by the way they're behaving? So if they're frustrated and angry and saying you're not helping them, they're feeling let down by the system. It's not about you. Traditionally, organizations that work with people is that they look at staff's job is to manage behavior. And a big way of doing that is imposing consequences. And I get really anxious when I hear people saying so-and-so needs to experience consequences. Usually that means we're frustrated and that they're not doing what we think they should do. Our job is to create the environment. And for the work you all are going to be doing, a lot of that is going to be the language you use and the tone that you use when you're doing it. You won't have the visual cues and the body language. And even in this environment, in normal settings, normally we could interact in a room and we could play off each other's body language, and I could tell who was bored and who isn't by looking at them. It's harder to do that in this setting. So we have to use whatever we have. So remember, we can choose how we respond to what people throw at us. It's always about a choice. Last one, clients aren't motivated. Basically, they may be an automatic response. They may just not know any other way to behave. Or they maybe have their danger meter may be stuck in the on position and they're going to react badly just because they don't know what else to say. Last one I'll say is the traditional view is that we have to come to work every day at our best and be in control and control situations and control ourselves at all times. That's pretty, everyone, we feel that way. The thing that we have to recognize is if we shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, we should apply that to ourselves too. And working with traumatized people can be really stressful. And we need to practice self-care. That's going to be the last part of our session. And we need regular support, because the more we take care of ourselves and process things, the more likely we are to going to be able to come into work every day at our best. But none of us is going to be at our best every single day. We're all human, unless there are exceptions. If you're superhuman and that's your superpower, raise your hand. No one? I thought surely Pete would raise his hand on that one, but guess not. Okay. So think about one quick way of looking at this is that if your response, you choose a response. If something is a trigger, something happens, if you choose a non-trauma informed response, you're increasing the chance of a negative outcome. And if you choose a trauma informed response, you're increasing the chance. No guarantees. You can be as trauma informed as anybody in the world, and a client can still have a very bad time and they can lose it, and you may have to call well, in your situation probably wouldn't, but in our situation here, when we're in person, we may have to call the police. We may have a whole lot of things that we have to do, and despite our best response. So let's make this real and be practical. You've already mentioned a few of these things. It's going to be hard in a call center setting to apply all of these things. But The biggest one you're going to have is the welcoming tone. If you were in an office setting, you want to look at the environment. Even if you only have 5 to 20 minutes with someone, you can allow a few minutes to build some trust. You can empathize with them a little bit and say, yeah, you're in a really tough position right now, aren't you? You know what I mean? So there are, even though you're not spending probably an hour with people doing a full-blown, you know, assessment and building rapport, you can do what you can in a short period of time. You want to be trustworthy. You don't want to promise things you can't. You want to be aware of triggers. A lot of the language we use can be triggering for clients. And we'll come to that when we do our little exercise. Practice empathy. My suggestion to people is, as much as possible, a whole bunch of people just disappeared, or don't, hopefully, are you all still in the room? The video and audio went off on like half of our class. So I'm assuming you're still here, but I can't tell for sure.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. Looks, it's just all of a sudden I'm talking to a bunch of dark screens, which gets very strange. So, okay, as long as you're still okay. All right. Empathy. Thinking of empathy is sensing other people's emotions. And as much as you can do that with tone of voice and things like that. I like to think about, and this has come from the greater good, that Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. Think about empathy 2 different ways, affective and cognitive. If you have affective empathy, you actually feel. You get a feeling in response to someone else's pain. So if someone else hurts, you hurt a little bit for them. And then cognitive empathy is thinking, understanding on a cognitive level. Whoa, they must be feeling this, that, and that. If you have emotional empathy without cognitive empathy, you're not going to be very trauma informed because you may, your own emotion may take over. So if you have emotional, and if you have cognitive empathy without emotional empathy, that's when clients will say, oh, this is just a job for you. It sounds like you're reading that off a piece of paper. So you want to find a balance between that. You want to feel it, but you also want to use judgment. So this trauma-informed care stuff is really hard because it requires using both parts of your brain, that limbic system and the emotion and the prefrontal cortex at the same time. Very hard to do. Fair enough? Attunement, we talked earlier. What is the function of behavior? When we talked about the principles and the do's and don'ts, the reframing of things. What is the function of the behavior? Why are they behaving this way? What are they trying to tell you? And then respond to that. So if they're screaming at you that no one helps them, they might be trying to tell you that they're really frightened because they're a single mom with 3 kids and they don't know what to do. Respond to the fear. Don't respond to the accusation. Use strength-based, client-centered language whenever you can, instead of saying you're stuck, you're this, you're that. Talk about how strong they are that they're, and how great it is that, you know, if you're talking about a single mom situation, I am impressed at your desire to do right by your kids and to take care of them. That's really hard in the situation you're in. Look at how much you've done so far. So focusing on the strengths. Takes practice. 2 of the ways we practice here, we require all of our staff to do nonviolent crisis intervention. May or may not be necessary in a call center setting because you're likely not going to have people trying to hit you. But that's, for those of you who have ever been through CPI training, that's what it is, learning how to deal with someone who has lost control and may want to be dangerous. And then there's another evidence-based program called Mental Health First Aid that teaches people to respond to mental health crises and worsening symptoms and things like that. Those, I think, would be more appropriate or more helpful to people that are working with people in person for longer periods of time than on a call center. But those are there. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. Pete, you still with us there? Is Pete there? I'm trying.
He's on mute.
Pete, unmute yourself. Hi, Pete. How are you? Can you ready to set up? There you are. Are you ready to set up breakout rooms? We're going to do a first of our little exercises.
All right. You're still the host, so I think you can do it.
Oh, I can do the breakout rooms? Okay. Oh, geez, I knew you'd make me do all the work. Okay, we're gonna assign them automatically. All right, there you go. Pete, you're gonna be in, so some of you will be in room 1, some of you will be in room 2. How exciting. So in this, what's gonna happen is you're going to be in a breakout room. I'm going to upload a worksheet for you. I am going to do it if the right thing pops up. There you go. And it's a reframing exercise worksheet. And you can download it. If you can't all download it, don't really worry. As long as one of you has it, that's okay. And that should pop into the chat box now for everyone. It's almost like is it working?
Yeah, it's in the chat box.
Hey, look at that. And it's a Word document, so hopefully you can all open it. Wow, it's almost like technology works sometimes, right? So when you get that reframing worksheet, it has a bunch of ways that either staff might describe a client or things staff might say to a client. And what we'd like you to do is pick a leader, someone who in the group or is going to report back. And each example, come up with an alter way of communicating to the clients that aligns with what we've talked about. So one of the examples might be that we call a client manipulative. I believe that's one of the ones on the sheet. What's a different way of describing a client without using that word? Something that's more client-centered and more strengths-focused. We'll give you about 10 minutes. So what I'll do is open the rooms. You'll get invited. You'll click on the invitation to enter the room. And if you have questions, there should be a button in the room that you can click on that says ask for help, and then it'll pop up on my screen that you have questions. So basically, take your worksheet, have a discussion. We'll be back in 10 minutes and we'll report back. Ready?
Yep.
And I'll give you a 1-minute warning before the time runs out. Here we go. I'll see you all in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
All participants have been invited. Umaira, are you all set over there? Did you get an invitation? There she goes. All right. Hi, Pete. You don't need to go into the room if you don't want. Oh, he did. Okay. Oh, because no one's with me. Hi, everybody. We're all back. Yep. So how was that exercise? Was that helpful for people?
It was.
So good to hear, because it gives you a break from having to listen to me, right? Room 1 was Brenda, Shermine, Latoya, Lorena, and Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. Any particular ones that stuck out to you that you want to report back on? Or things, if you don't have to admit, but things that you found yourself, that you see on paper that you have heard yourself say to people that you've had to think about and think of a different way of saying them? No one wants to admit to that, right?
We weren't able to do the exercise. We were spending time trying to get a document.
Oh dear. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So how is there anything you can report back then?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was able to get through the first part once we figured out our tech stuff.
Okay, yep.
Yeah. So the second part, I did not have an opportunity to get to yet. I was just starting it.
Okay.
But I want to see the document because there was one that I did.
I'm going to try to share it with all of you right now.
Okay.
Keep going.
There was one that I was a little struggling with how I might describe a client in a trauma-informed way.
Okay.
Was I think sabotage. I think I picked sets themselves up for failure due to lack of self-esteem, but that didn't really feel very trauma-informed. So
that didn't feel better, did it? Yeah. Let's pull it up here.
Yeah.
Is it showing?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Strangely enough, it's not showing for me. So it's underneath like several windows with chat boxes and stuff like that. Okay. So we're going to make this smaller. Okay, there I am. So there's the exercise. So sabotage, any ideas on how we can talk about people? You hear people say that a lot. They're sabotaging themselves. They're sabotaging themselves. If you think about the context and what that's saying, is it really makes it sound like they're doing something on purpose, doesn't it? So I would encourage people. So what, does anyone have any thoughts? It doesn't have to be group 1. Let's all do it as one big group. How might you reframe that?
Well, group 2 did come up with some responses to this section.
Go group 2. Okay, show us what you got.
As a group, when we were talking about specifically sabotage, we all said that instead of saying like, being more trauma for being like that person who's sabotaging themselves, saying that they need redirection.
Okay, so maybe even saying, instead of using the word need, that they respond, or that redirection helps them, using client-centered, client-first language. One of the things I would say about self-sabotage is just saying that they have difficulty following through with things. They have difficulty making it, they make a decision and they have a tough time. Their feelings get in the way of following through. it becomes, so then you're focusing on the fact that they're struggling. I mean, you could be, a lot of times when the behaviors that we talk about when we talk about self-sabotage result from fear. So you might say they seem to be afraid to take the next step.
Could it be
And
like
that's
fear of
probably-
success or fear of failure too?
Could be, absolutely, absolutely. Or it could be that they don't believe that, I mean, a lot of this is context because you got to get to know the people that you're talking about. And so everyone's going to be, could be that they don't believe that it's going to work. That whatever it is you're saying isn't help. I mean, it's nice, but it doesn't apply to me. I've tried that before. So there's a lot of different, so if you think, what is it they're telling you? Is that helpful? Does that make sense? I think as long as you talk about, if you name it with a feeling, I mean, believe it or not, I have had people write in progress notes that I've had to have them rewrite that clients are lazy. I mean, difficulty with following through, you know, or they might be having too much fatigue. I mean, you think about people who have experienced trauma, they may not sleep well, they might be having nightmares, so they might just be too tired to function. So it may not be that they're lazy, they just may not have energy, or they might be depressed. And I mean, anyone who has experienced depression knows it sucks our energy, right?
Yeah.
And any others? Let's pick one other one, because I know what time are we ending? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock?
11:30.
Okay, so we're gonna go fast. Let's do one more. How about I'm not gonna work harder than you? Has anyone ever heard that? Or you don't have to admit if you said it, but.
I have said, I feel like I'm more concerned about your shelter than you are.
Ah, interesting. So you're using an emotion. You're expressing a feeling about it as opposed to passing a judgment on it. If it seems like I'm more worried about you than you're worried about yourself, I'm more concerned about your shelter than you are. That I don't think is as trauma uninformed. You know what I mean? You're not saying you're not working. If they say I'm not going to work harder, then I always say, when I hear that from staff, I say, our clients work harder every day just to survive than I work on my worst day here at Crossroads. The people just to live, when they have to focus so much on survival, they're working hard already. So they might be working on something else. Maybe the thing is maybe the goals we're talking about might not be their goals. So instead of saying I'm not going to work harder on your goals, say, gee, is this really something you want? What is it you're looking at? It seems like you're having a hard time. You say this is what you want. This goes into sort of motivational interviewing stuff. You're saying X, this is your goal, but then you're doing Y. I'm a little confused because they don't mesh together. Help me understand that. And that's a skill for a whole nother training at another time. So let's not go there, since we only have till 11:30. So has this been helpful? I hope this has been a helpful exercise.
Yeah.
It has, and I like what you said. It does go along with MI. I like the two trainings.
Absolutely.
coincide.
Yep. I will say that over and over and over again, that trauma-informed care, harm reduction, motivational interviewing, if we can learn those, the rest of our skills are a bonus. I mean, everything else we do is a bonus. If we can do those basic skills, then we will have a much higher likelihood of success with our clients. Shall we move on? Because we're gonna wrap all of this up, and we may skip our last breakout group, so I apologize, but I am going to upload to you. Were you all able to at least eventually get the document?
Yeah.
Yes.
I did.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I'm gonna give you all some do's and don'ts. I'm not gonna read them all to you. Just take a quick look at them. And I've got this in a handout that I'll upload towards the end of the training. Big things about do's and don'ts is we often staff people tend to talk too much, and we tend to talk at people. So be comfortable with silence, listen. Monitor your tone of voice. If you, especially for me, one of the things I've learned over the years about myself is I can be starting to get frustrated and not know it right away. And I was thinking of a situation that came up yesterday with someone where I was finding myself getting annoyed because they weren't doing what I wanted them to do. And I could feel it in my gut. And I went, uh-oh, you're not being trauma informed. This is about you. This is not about them. And I had to pull myself back. And a lot of it is the internal self-talk, which, you know, telling myself, wait a minute, slow down. Other things which fit with do's and don'ts. We talked at the beginning, one of the principles of voice and choice and mutuality and respect, asking what they need. What can they do? If they want something we don't have, we have to be honest and say we don't have it, obviously, but we can certainly apologize for that. Please don't tell people how to heal. Everybody's way of healing is different. There are some things that have been found to be very helpful for a lot of people. And the last one is pay attention to boundaries. In the setting that you're in, and in most of the settings in that I do this training, the details of people's trauma are not important to us, and we shouldn't be digging into it. We're not, even if you're a clinician and that's what you do for a living, and even if you run trauma support groups for a living, most likely in this setting, answering these phones, that's not what you're being asked to do. So don't do it. You can't treat people in a 5-minute phone call. So don't go into the details. If people tell you the details, empathize, say, gee, that sounds like it was a really hard thing. And you can certainly offer what resources there are, but stay focused on your boundaries, stay in your lane on this. And please, please, please don't talk to clients about your own trauma. You may think you're being helpful, but really what you're doing is shifting the focus off of themselves, off of them and onto you. And it can actually be harmful to people. So if I sit there, I'm taking a call from somebody and they're telling me, I mean, they're homeless and they've been sleeping outside and they don't have a job and they've got all these problems. And they tell me about something particularly traumatic that happened and say, oh yeah, I know what you mean, how you feel, that happened to me. Think about the power differential that is automatic in that relationship. And what am I telling them? I'm telling them that I went through this trauma, same thing you went through. And look at me, I'm a professional working and holding myself together, and they don't know that I might be still having to go to therapy in my own time. So it can be demeaning in an odd way. People don't often think of that. They think they're being helpful. But if I'm talking to someone who is down and out and they're struggling and they're at the worst point in their lives, and I say, oh yeah, I went through that, look, I survived. Then they may sit there and say, what's wrong with me? Why am I not surviving? So I tend to belabor that, but I shouldn't. So thinking about the client's perspective, we may think that we're all hunky-dory together, you know, nice group of people sitting in a circle, talking to each other. And if we're not paying attention, who knows who that is on the lower right hand of the screen?
Nurse Ratchet.
Nurse Ratchet, from where?
Got One Flew Over the Cuckoo's
Right.
Nest. I can't talk today, sorry.
One Flew, I can't either, so we're in the same. Talking perfectly is not required today, right? She thought she was being helpful. I mean, for those of you who remember the movie, you have to be probably of a certain age or like classic movies. But she was, if you watch, she thought she was doing the right thing. And she did a lot of harm to people. And we don't want to be Nurse Ratchet. So there's the breakout rooms. We did that. Well, I apologize. There we go. This would be one of the things I would ask you if you're working in an office to take a look at your office environment. But most likely you'll be doing it through phones and computers, right? So let's get that. We'll talk quickly about vicarious traumatization. Another nice, big, long words for burnout. What we mean when we talk about the definition is a change in us, change in the worker because of being exposed to the client's trauma. So when you talk vicarious traumatization, these are some of the symptoms. You don't feel effective. You might be apathetic. You might feel like your job doesn't matter. You might start feeling sick. You might not want to see your friends. You might be irritable. I know when I'm feeling that way, irritability is the thing that comes out. Sometimes feelings and sadness of grief are the things that pop up for people. So the way we do it is we need to manage stress. The way you handle vicarious traumatization, a couple things to think about. Be ready, know that it is hard. When you pick up that phone, know that this may not be easy, and tell yourself that. And a big part of it is knowing what your own baggage is and knowing how you're feeling. And sometimes taking a breath and saying, yep, I'm feeling stressed. I will deal with that later. And give your brain, if you think about what we talked about way back at the beginning, when we talked about the brain and the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and the limbic system and all that, that happens to us too. So if you get accosted verbally by a client on the phone, your amygdala is going to sense a threat, and you may find yourself reacting. One of the things we can do is stop, take a long deep breath in and a long deep breath out, and give your prefrontal cortex time to turn back on. So give your thinking time to catch up. You don't have to respond immediately. And it's funny, in one of the trainings I did recently with staff at Crossroads, I talked about that, and the staff person said, I see you do that sometimes when you're doing a training and someone asks you a really hard question, you'll stop and I'll see you take a breath and stop. I said, yeah, because we feel quicker than we think. And taking that breath gives us time to think, and we can say, okay, then we get to choose a response instead of just reacting. Remember, you're not going to save people, hard as it may be, and you're not going to solve every problem. If I work in a hardware store and someone comes in looking for a gallon of milk, I don't feel like a failure because I don't have milk. I say, gee, you need milk. 7-Eleven down the street might have that. And I don't feel like I failed. But if someone comes in here, and a lot of times staff get stuck in that, and they have this problem, that problem, that problem, and we don't have the resources to solve them all, we feel as if we failed them. That is, yes, are they being traumatized by it? Yes, that's systemic trauma. It's not you. And you may have to say, this is not mine. And a lot of what I've done for myself over the years to manage this stuff is manage my self-talk, which is like the cognitive behavioral thing. When I go into a meeting that I know is going to be challenging, I take a deep breath and I say, you've dealt with difficult things before. You'll manage this. Remember to take a time to breathe. And then I'll go in. And those kinds of things, but they sound hokey, but they actually, a lot of people find them helpful. Pete, are you ready to put up the poll? Uh-oh. Can I do the poll?
Stop blaming me for everything.
Pete, do it all. You're supposed to be doing everything. Okay, we're going to do a quick poll. Never mind. This one is not Pete's fault. This is mine. Apparently, I'm the host. I get to do it all. Thanks, Pete. All right, so you can see a poll on your screen. What are some of the ways that we practice self-care? So take a quick minute and just, you should be able to, if Pete set it up correctly, check as many as you like. Did we set it up that way, Pete?
It doesn't let us, it only let us check one.
Oh God, hold on. Let me change.
It is Pete's fault.
It is. Damn it.
It's okay, then we can go with the flow. Pick the one that is the most important to you.
All right.
We don't need to change it right now. It's not, it's just, the purpose is to get people thinking about what the kinds of things that work for them. So pick the number one thing that helps you take care of yourself. And we should have a total of 11, right? 3, 5, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. Couple more people. All right, that's everyone. So this is what people give. So let's see. Can you all see the results?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So the big ones, interestingly enough, big ones, 3 and 3, the biggest are mindfulness practice and spiritual practice. And I would say for a lot of people that those are really, really big things that help to manage the stress and the vicarious trauma that we deal with. A lot of people will find exercise helpful. Just spending time with families and friends sometimes is very helpful for people. I would encourage people, if you do things, to try to find something that isn't related to your work. It's funny, like one of the things that I do is I volunteer for the Wilbury Theater Company here in Providence. And my husband and I do a lot of stuff like that. And the reason we do it is it's totally different from what I do at work. And it makes a different part of my brain engaged. So I feel, I mean, it's volunteering. I feel tired when I'm done, but I feel energized. Plus I get to talk to a bunch of people who are artsy fartsy and not clinical. And so it makes me think differently. And sometimes just a break helps. One person picked other. Does that person feel like they want to share it? No pressure, you don't have to. But I'm just curious if you want to, here's your chance. If not, we'll just move on.
I work with a child who is autistic. I am his, I guess you could say, pass worker. And
oh yeah.
it is like such a joy in my life. It's not
great.
work.
Oh wow, that's cool. So giving and caring for someone else helps. Great, thank you. All right, we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna go through this last bit really fast. And then we have about 10 minutes according to my clock. Yep, okay. So back to this. So practicing self-care. Some things that come from, and I have a self-care handout I'll upload. This focusing on positive as much as possible. Notice your successes. And one way to help other people practice self-care is to notice their successes. So if I see Meg do something handle a really tough situation and she manages it, saying, gee, that was hard, look how well you did, can make a huge difference in our ability to be trauma informed. And so notice successes, pay attention to the messages you give yourself. If you find yourself walking out of work saying, oh, these people, they're horrible, they're this, they're that, that's something you want to talk to someone about, because those messages reinforce each other. Mindfulness practice, a lot of people talked about getting up, taking a vacation, taking a time off. Self-care, taking care of yourself physically, diet, exercise, seeking support, supervision. If you need extra support, if your employer has an EAP, not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to talk to someone yourself. Last thing we'll get into is the concept of resilience. And I think it's always important to talk when we talk about trauma, to talk about resilience, because we can get stuck. It's easy to get stuck talking about so many people have so much trauma and it's so hard and they're going to be so difficult to talk to. And sometimes they're mean to us and sometimes they don't do the things they say they're going to do. And it can start to feel very overwhelming in itself. And I don't want to do a training and traumatize you all by saying how hard this is. It is hard, but it's not impossible. We have skills. We are capable people. We can do this. So when you think about resilience, think about it in terms of adapting in the face of adversity. The way people mostly describe it is bouncing back. If we were in a classroom setting, I would ask you all to write down a definition of resilience. And the one that most people come up with is bouncing back. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to get annoyed with clients. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to have bad days. It means that you can keep that in perspective and bounce back. The other thing it also means is that we can help our clients to learn that. And you may have limited opportunity to do that. Question, is resilience innate or learned? If you think it's innate, raise your hand. I know you got to use those little reaction buttons, huh?
I feel like it's a little of both.
Oh, Meg, you ruined it. I was going to make people vote, and now you're absolutely right. I was going to try to back people into a corner and make them say one or the other, but you're absolutely 100% right. So you get a gold star. Some people, for those of you who worked in the field for a while, will know people that have grown up in horrific, horrible environments, and somehow they manage to be well adjusted. And none of us knows why. It could just be that they have a better functioning amygdala. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. And then other people, you can meet them, and what you think is really relatively minor, they fall apart. I see when I talk to parents, I used to work with children and families a lot. Like in the same household, one kid would be fine, and the other kid would be falling apart at the drop of a hat. Some of it is innate, but it doesn't mean we can't learn it. We can learn it, and we can also help other people to learn it. So how do we help people learn resilience? Encouraging connectedness. One of the things that helps people to be more resilient is to be connected to others. Being empathetic to people, just focusing and reflecting the emotions. If you talk in terms of motivational interviewing, all those basic OR skills, open questions, reflections, things like that, very important. Reframing things helps people feel resilient. So talking about, something that's happening, is it a crisis or is it a chance to learn new goals? And also when they're in a crisis, pointing out their strengths. Helping people develop realistic goals, practicing problem-solving skills, role modeling. A lot of what I tell people, especially in in-person settings, is when you're working with a client, what you do is being watched. So when I'm at Crossroads and I walk down into the front lobby and I interact with a client, every other client is watching me. And the way I interact is the way Crossroads treats people. And if I can role model dealing with a client that's agitated and out of control, and I can maintain calm, other people see that. They see that it's possible to deal with people that are upset and not lose control. So people watch and learn. It's the social learning theory. And always being hopeful, even when it's hard, optimistic. Being aware of cultural differences, always. So this is my rendering. I found this photo of resilience, even in the midst of total nothing, and their life still struggles and still continues. We would normally break out into scenarios, but we're going to skip all of that. And then sake of time. And we'll go back to what our learning objectives were. So do people feel like they can define trauma? Do you know what trauma is and how it differs from other forms of bad things happening?
Yeah.
Yep. Do we understand trauma's effect, have the basic understanding of trauma's effect, the basic principle of trauma's informed care? And do you feel like you have something that you can bring back with you when you go and start taking phone calls? If there's something that we didn't touch on that's missing, by all means, let me know. Just so you'll know, I can happily I'll send to Pete wow, why is each of these animated? That is absolutely a ridiculous thing I did when I set this up. These are our references. I'm glad to send these slides out for you, and there's a couple of handouts I'll upload into the chat box. The reason I put references is, one is I want to make sure you know that I didn't just pull this stuff out of my hat, that I want things to be evidence-based as much as I can. And also, if you want to do more reading, there's a lot of stuff out there on trauma-informed care. So let me give you 2 files that should be available, and we'll do one last thing that I won't, and then I'm going to upload a file. This is a file on self-care after trauma. Just a 1-page handout that you can keep and use, sort of like check in on it every once in a while. And this is the trauma-informed care do's and don'ts slide that we went through really quickly. And I'm going to give you one last quick, we have 2 minutes. I'm going to do a quiz that I am borrowing from, can you see that quiz?
Yeah.
Okay, this is our demonstrating your knowledge and ability question. So question number 1, true or false? Trauma-informed care takes into account knowledge of all aspects of service delivery. True or false? You can all unmute and yell.
True.
True.
True. Trauma-specific treatments directly address the impact of trauma on an individual's life and facilitate trauma recovery. They're designed to treat the actual experiences of trauma. True or false?
True.
True.
All righty, I just closed the trauma-specific treatments are designed to treat trauma, so that one is true. Trauma-informed care is specifically designed to treat symptoms related to trauma? True or false?
False.
False. Trauma-informed care is designed to create an environment that respects and understands trauma and doesn't re-traumatize people. Number 4, an assumption of trauma-informed care is that every interaction with a trauma survivor has the opportunity to activate a trauma response.
True.
Say true.
True.
Yep. Universal precautions, right? In order to provide trauma-informed care, one must provide trauma-specific treatment. True or false?
False.
False. And it's interesting because a lot of organizations that are not even mental health providers or social services providers are learning about trauma-informed care in other settings, because you don't have to be doing treatment in order to be trauma-informed. Number 6, trauma-informed care can be thought of as an engagement tool such that any service one provides is in the most approachable and least re-traumatizing way.
True.
True. Trauma-informed care is critical for survivors, but is also welcomed by those without a trauma history.
True.
True.
True. Yep. If we are trauma-informed, we're going to be nice and respectful and empathetic to even people who don't have a trauma history. So that's where universal precautions make sense, because even if someone hasn't been traumatized, they're still going to appreciate the way you behave. Number 8, we didn't talk about dialectical behavior therapy, trauma recovery empowerment model, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and seeking safety are all examples of trauma-informed care. Those are false. Those are all treatment models. Those are all models. They're actually trauma-specific treatment. Dialectical behaviors therapy, not specifically for trauma, but they find that it does work. TREM, and there's the one specifically for women called Trauma Recovery Empowerment Model. Those actually have been shown to be really effective. Which of these, take a look at number 9, which of these is not a guiding principle of trauma-informed care?
B.
B? This one's a trick
I
one.
said B.
I had to have the answers. If you look down, the answers were showing, and I moved this on the screen. Can you still see the answers under there? Yep. C. Compassion and empathy are not a guiding principle. They're an actual skill that you practice. So, little trick. See, you can't make it too easy, right? And then the last one, at work, you're participating in a trauma-informed care workshop. One of the workshop's tasks is to assess the lobby with a trauma-informed lens. The group comes up with the suggestions. Which one is not trauma-informed out of those? This one is easy. And I don't know if you can, I will eventually redo this so the answers aren't there so that people can't see them, but.
E.
So all of the others fit with trauma-informed care. You're using the principle of creating safety, the safety principle, the smells and sounds in the environment. So if you have our front lobby here at Crossroads can get really chaotic sometimes, and we've tried to come up with ways like not having people in there all the time because it gets noisy, and that can be a trigger for people. Asking the people who are in the lobby. Empowerment, voice, and choice we talked about. Asking people who work in or near, so asking the staff people, again, empowerment, voice, and choice. And then assessing the welcoming nature of the space, so looking at the environment itself. So, you all passed. Congratulations. Are there any other last questions, comments, thoughts? We're 2 minutes past our time. I want to be respectful. So I'm happy to wrap up, but if you have any other questions, I can stick around for a few minutes. Is there anything else? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the documentary Resilience. If folks are interested in watching that, it's really good.
Yes, absolutely. And if the other one that people look at, there's another one that's called Healing Neen, N-E-E-N. It's about a woman who was long-term homeless with substance use problems and is now an advocate and works for the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. Absolutely, there's a lot of video you can watch that just makes things more real. Definitely.
Where can you find those? Are they on Netflix or?
Healing Neen, sadly, I think you have to buy from her now. Resilience, I believe, is available on some streaming services.
I think it's on Prime, on Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime? Yeah, I don't remember which ones, but.
Okay.
Other comments, thoughts, arguments?
I have a question. The vicarious traumatization,
Mhm.
is that something that like we as workers would notice immediately? Like, oh, I that's or is it subtle and does it build, would the symptoms build very subtly and then you
Good
realize
question.
later, oh my gosh, this has been growing and I didn't even notice. And like,
I would say, I can't speak from research studies, but I'd say from my experience over time, I think it's usually more subtle than that. So as you work together as a team, it's important to help each other. One of the scenarios that we didn't get to today usually has actually, we have all these scenarios about clients, and then the last one is about you have a staff person that is behaving in a way that is concerning to you. What do you do? Usually what happens is people start feeling frustrated with one particular situation. And then that situation happens again and again and again, or different situations, and they start piling up. And if you think about what we talked about way back at the beginning, the events, the experience, the 3 E's, and the effects, when you talk about, it almost fits with the model of complex trauma. It keeps happening. So our ability to cope, we get tired. We just get tired of coping. And so most people, when they're experiencing vicarious traumatization, a lot of people will say they don't even notice it until it gets to the point where they're not sleeping, they're having nightmares, they're struggling. So as you practice being trauma-informed with clients, I would strongly encourage you to practice being trauma-informed with each other and to reach out. And if I see, all of your names just disappeared because my mouse was moving. If I see Lorena and she's having a bad day and I hear her saying something that doesn't sound very trauma-informed, instead of going and running to Pete and saying, oh my God, you know what Lorena's doing, see how she's talking, go up and say, hey, sounds like that was really hard. That would be a trauma-informed approach with each other. But if something really bad happens, I've seen it happen where, we've had, without going into gory details, we've had some pretty horrific things happen to clients here at Crossroads, and I'm sure some of you have too. Those kinds of things can cause people, like we had a client, a staff person that got assaulted by a client very seriously. Fortunately, it's the only time it's happened here that I know of, probably about 7-8 years ago. That staff person ended up taking several months out of work. So yes, it can happen pretty dramatically, but I think in most people's circumstances, it's kind of a gradual wearing down. So you don't notice it until the point you're like, oh, I don't want to go to work tonight. Does that help?
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any last questions, comments? Has this been helpful? I hope it has. I hope it's gives you some.
You've been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'm really hopeful that it gives you something to bring back with you. I am also always wanting, this is, like I said, I was revising this last night. I am very much a believer in 3 things that all staff need to do. We need to be trauma informed, we need to be committed to harm reduction, and we need to know the basics of motivational interviewing. Those are the 3 that I teach here at Crossroads. We also have to be committed to housing first, but that's a philosophy. And I read about this stuff. I love reading about it. And so if you have thoughts, if you have comments, Pete knows how to reach me, or actually I can just type you my email address. And I would love to hear feedback, or if you come across something that you think might be helpful for future groups, send it to me. I'm always open to new ideas, and I love to play with slides and make them new. So I want to thank you, because I will say, the last word I will say is, I hate doing training on Zoom. Since we've been in this pandemic and we started doing them on Zoom, I've gone home and I've done a lot of them in-house. And I go home and my husband looks at me, he's like, what's the matter? I said, I did a Zoom training. I have such a headache. I don't have a headache. And I say thank you, because you've all participated. And I really appreciate that, because it makes it so much more meaningful for me. So thank you for being such a great audience. Thank you for being willing to do the work you're going to do. Remember, it's going to be hard, but you are all competent, capable people. And as hard as it is, we learn from the things that are hard and we move forward. So thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thanks, Don. I'll see everybody in the next training.
All righty. And so,
Okay.
Pete, the next thing for you is let's chat and let me know how you think about how we can move forward and what we need to do different next time. So let's find a topic to chat soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Have a
Don.
good one, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.